pour tous, Energy for All, includes Auriane, Meilland, Charlotte Debeuf, Emilie, Etienne, and Miguel Vasconcelos, Felipe and Vasconcelos.
So do you have, in this workshop, we want each one of you to, interact about the other presentation. What did you learn? What about the solution? What about the question raised during the full presentation? And we can also ask the other participants to share with you, because the purpose is really to share the knowledge that we all learned during this morning, and so that can help each speaker to improve their research, to find different way of tackle a question or to tackle their own research. So we really hope every one of us can interact during this 10-minute workshop, 10 to 15-minute workshop. And if you are too shy to ask question, please feel free to ask. Feel free to use Slack, and in Zoom, just raise your hand, and we're gonna give you the mic.
Well, maybe I have a question or comment. Well, it's more of a comment, because I think in the 4 presentations we tackled the topic of energy in different ways. For example, the last presentation was more about how we can improve supply of energy. The one from Auriane about the perceptions of citizens was a bit maybe of a mix, because that's also a question. When you ask citizens about do they think it's the engagement of different countries are fair, do they also understand that it might request an effort from their part to lower the demand? And then also we had the presentation from Charlotte about carbon pricing, and well, here as well it can impact as well demand and offer. So I'm just like wondering how we can tackle both demand and supply of energy, because I think in some cases it was clearly more about supply, other it's a bit mixed. So well, it's just a general comment, and I'm wondering about the other speakers, how do they think about this question, how we can tackle at the same time both topics.
Well, maybe if I can answer to you, it's very interesting your comments, and thank you very much for it. I agree with you that it's a kind of different perspective that we can have. As for me, and how I tackled it in my survey, it was mainly about the fact that, as you may have underlined it, our participant didn't necessarily understand that the country, well, that it necessitated effort for the country, for their particular country. But we try and introduce the notion to them, and we introduce them to other tools, actually about what we call reflective capabilities, which were about maybe proposing the more cost-effective approach, which would be that the more a country can do, the more it does. Oh, I'm sorry for this, the mic problems. I hope you can hear me well. Well, so yeah, we tried and introduced some cost-effective methods and saying, well, the countries who can do more should do more. But that's actually a sort of equity rules that wasn't really adhered to, and most of the countries didn't really like this idea. But it's also maybe because the citizens that we were talking to were living in developed countries, so it was clearly not in their best interest to say that the country who can do more should do more. And that's something that I find very interesting, and that's why we also want to test in developing countries. As for my subject, I think maybe that's an insight to your very interesting remark. And thank you very much.
I'd like to answer to you, Auriane. I think it's maybe we take it for granted how normal we think it is, or so, that when you have the money, when you have the infrastructure to do more, that we should. But I can understand that in climate agreements 20 years ago, or even more recently, this was not always the case. I mean, that's completely different. We as individuals can think that, but it's different if you speak on the behalf of a country. And I think it's interesting how, as you said, Emilie, we all treat like a different aspect of this like issue. And what I really try to do, what I find super important, is to not only look at the, like, on my perspective, so on the political side of this whole issue, right? So I think it would be very easy to say, oh, well, every country should implement a carbon tax. This is the way to go. But then not looking at, like, not knowing how does industry work, how does climate justice work, how does, as like, you know, about solar panels, how do batteries work, all this stuff I think is super important to know, and it's super important to take into consideration to be able to see the whole problem, like to see the whole issue and to know what the solutions can be. Obviously, we cannot know everything, but we can try to learn more every day and then see how this can contribute to our perspective and to our view of the solution.
There is a question in the Zoom about entropy, but personally, I'm not very familiar with this paradigm. So I don't know if the person who put the comment can introduce a bit more, maybe orally, what she or he means by entropy, so that we can react on this comment. Because at least, as for me, I'm not very familiar with this concept.
Oui, bonjour. C'est pas une question, hein, mais je crois que c'est vraiment un paradigme un petit peu ce qu'on appelle une loi universelle. C'est une loi qui a été découverte au début du XXe siècle. Sa prise en considération est quand même très limitée. Donc, ce qui a conduit Bernard Stiegler à travailler sur cette question avec des scientifiques. Et il y a eu un certain nombre d'économistes qui l'ont pris en considération, dont Nicolas Georgescu-Roegen, qui est un peu le fondateur de la bioéconomie. Une question qui a été reprise par Jeremy Rifkin, qui a fait un livre sur cette question-là et ses effets sur les questions économiques, puisque Rifkin est un économiste. Et on a travaillé à des propositions dans ce sens, en prenant en considération ce paradigme de l'entropie, hein, de la dissipation irréversible de l'énergie, dans un livre qui est paru, un livre collectif qui est paru en juin 2020 et qui s'appelle Bifurqué. Mais je crois qu'il faudrait plus de temps pour en parler, mais peut-être que j'en parlerai à Yann Thomas pour qu'on puisse avoir des échanges ensemble. Voilà. Et je ne parlais pas parce qu'il y a des travaux à côté de chez moi et voilà, c'est assez difficile. Donc je m'arrête là, mais c'est une piste peut-être pour la suite.
Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention. Je vois, I see Tarek has a question.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for recognizing me to speak. As I'm doing my PhD in international law, both private and public, and as Miss Meilland, I'm sorry, said earlier, those that can do more should do more. On a personal perspective, I agree completely. I've noticed that the speaker discussed international conventions to regulate the efforts of each party, but could you please elaborate on what you believe the role of non-state actors can be in this circumstance, especially since we discussed that if individuals believe that we should be doing better, maybe we can have an influence through the non-state actors on how they decide to continue. And maybe that can allow us to use legal aspects in domestic law to help guide these non-state actors in their attitudes. Does that sound like something feasible to you, Madame Meilland?
Well, basically, what I think. Well, as you kind of summed it up really well. What's very interesting about the Paris Agreement is that it's not constraining in terms of legal, well, on the legal side, the only thing the countries have to do really is produce an NDC and then regularly update it. And there are stuff about being transparent, but they don't really need to kind of get to the NDC. So that's not something that is mandatory in the Paris Agreement. But in what I feel is really interesting is once the countries have produced their NDC, it's usually translated into their domestic law, and then that's where it gives the citizens sort of a point of entry to maybe try and sue the countries for more climate ambitions, as it may have been done in the past. So we've seen here in France, we have something that was done about it. We have the Netherlands, in which citizens and NGOs decided to sue the countries. So in a sense, that's something that's feasible, but then usually what's needed for the judges to give the decision is a sort of evaluation, or maybe a scientific, I guess, evaluation of what, or if the country that is sued maybe gives or is ambitious enough. And that's where all my work, I think, is very interesting and should be pursued in further studies. It's that we really need to have a real discussion on what equity principles we should be valuing, and how to evaluate the fairness of a country's contribution, because otherwise there's not going to be any judgment decision from it, and the judges really need some point of entry or maybe some reference for them to make a decision when there's something that's done about it by citizens. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think your remark is very interesting.
Yes, you answered perfectly. Thank you very much.
And also, when I said it was interesting for non-state actors, it's really interesting for NGOs, but it's also interesting for businesses, because it's always interesting for a business to know whether the country where it's based is interesting or is maybe more ambitious than others or less ambitious than others in terms of climate change. And that kind of resonates with something that Charlotte said in her presentation, which is about carbon leakages. And if you're a business and you see that your country is going to be way more ambitious than the other, maybe it's going to encourage you to go in another country. Or if you have a positive emulation that all the countries are sort of all ambitious enough in that sort of way, then it's not really encouraging for a business to go and go in another country. So that's interesting for the NGOs and the citizens, but also for businesses.
Well, thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer. If we don't have any more questions, well, what you can do is you can continue the interaction or sharing in Slack. We really encourage you to continue sharing information, sharing about your topics, ask questions directly in Slack, because we built a community for before the conference, during the conference, and after. So Tarek, if you have more questions to ask to Auriane, then feel free to do it on Slack. It's going to be easier. You can do it in private or directly in the channel 1, which is energy. And if we don't have any more question on interaction, then I invite you to come back this afternoon, 1:45, same link, same place, to talk about the second topic, which is think about human development, with how many participants we have this afternoon? With 5 participants. So see you this afternoon, and once again, thank you very much for this great presentations this morning. So see you this afternoon. Bye.